Music. All right. Yeah, we have so many things to cover today, so I'm sorry to interrupt the nice music by Dizzy Gillespie. Welcome to Museum of the African Diaspora's Art as We See It. My name is Today, and I'm here with my colleagues Dimitri, Remy, and Charlie and Aswan. MoAD's physical building may be closed due to the mandatory shelter in place, but you can still get your fill of art and artists of the African diaspora every other Thursday, 2 p.m. PST. And we have so many programs. Please check out our calendar. And we invite you to join MoAD Docents as we look at art with you with curiosity and wonder. We contextualize the art and discuss the artist and art form with you and say whatever wonderful thing that comes to our minds. And we encourage you to do the same. This week's art, as we see it, we look at paintings by William H. Johnson. We've searched several digital public domain archives to bring you selected works that celebrate one of the most brilliant painters of the 20th century. Please join us in conversation via chat as we discussed aesthetics, cultural context, and William H. Johnson's fascinating life. If you're joining us on Facebook, please leave a comment and we'll jump in and out of Zoom to check on you. And before we start, we'll have a moment of silence as we stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Okay. As many of us are settler, immigrants, and descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions are founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples whose land we are located. With deep respect, MoAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, our people, our work, and our network servers are our native lands. And thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Oh boy. All right. Well, we are so excited to discuss William H. Johnson's work and life with you today. And it all started in 1901. He was born in Florence, South Carolina. And he was born to a working class financially poor family. And at the age of 17, he left South Carolina and left to go to New York to live with his uncle. And he worked, and while he was working, he got enough money. He did jobs here and there, and saved enough money to send himself to a design school. So while he was learning at National Academy of Design, he entered that in 1921, and he was really recognized as a huge talent. And one of his instructors, the name is escaping me right now, he recognized his talent and he said, okay, well, I'm going to send you to Paris. I'm going to collect enough money. I'm going to collect enough money to send you to Europe to study art. And he collected about $1,000 and sent him off to study art in Paris. And it all begins again from that. So I don't want to give out all of his life, but what I want to say is that it's a life of a series of unfortunate events. And at the same time, resilience comes with that. And at the same time, this beautiful artist who has created beautiful work lives on. And so we will talk about his life, but before that, I will go on to the next slide. And so this is his wife. They met in Paris, and I'm definitely rushing through his life, but I know that with the docents, it will come up. So many things will come up, and this is his wife, Holchak Karka, and they met in Paris, and she's an artist. She's a tapestry. She's a textile artist, and they were soulmates. They hit it off right away, and there's a 16 years difference between them, and so she's older. And they were soulmates. They were happy. They co-created. They created art together, and there's so much more to cover when we talk about William H. Johnson. But one thing I want to show you is in this photo, I spotted one of the paintings that we're going to discuss. Oh, Charlie, you're right. Yeah, I've heard it many times. It's Holka Karka, right?
Creek, Holka Creek.
Creek, got it. Okay. And if you see the painting that I've zoomed on right above where the wood top is, it's a painting we're going to look at next. And this is their studio. She's working on her textile, and I think he's fixing his pipe or something, and that will come up again in the painting. He's lighting up his pipe. There he is.
Smoking break.
That's right. Yeah.
So this is the one that I'm going to be talking about. Sun setting, and it's a really interesting painting if we look at it, especially if you look at the kind of central sun image. You see these really swirly lines, and it's really indicative of what the type of thing that Van Gogh was doing. And I think he's very strongly nodding his head to that style. It's a style that he wouldn't stay with for very long. But you have to remember, he's in Europe. He's studying a lot of the great masters, and he's got a Danish wife. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Danish wife.
Yeah.
And she's getting him to look at a lot of the Northern European, Scandinavian artists. So he definitely would have been influenced by Van Gogh and would have seen Van Gogh. What I think is interesting, though, about this work is that he's using, what the Smithsonian likes to call as this fisheye lens, so that you're seeing, instead of that horizon being flat, you're seeing it as though you're seeing it in a circular lens. So it really starts to bend what should be a flat horizon line into a circle and distorts it in a way. And I think that gives it just a little bit more personal touch. I think a lot of artists would have been copying Van Gogh's work when they were studying in Europe. But I think this really separates it from some of the things that other artists are doing. Another thing that to me is really interesting is, you see this boat in the water, And actually, if you change your perspective on how you look at that boat, it almost looks like a skull. You see these two wide eye sockets and then something that looks like the mouth area. You have to kind of adjust your vision a little bit. And I'm just wondering if any of the panelists have any thoughts about that and what that might mean.
Mm. Sorry about that.
Okay, no thoughts about it. That's okay.
No, well, I guess for me, one of the things that just looking at this as well is just how much movement there is to the piece, and how using these brushstrokes and colors to create movement. So you have a lot of movement around the sun, and then you have the the yellow in the middle that almost moves back out into almost like a 3D towards us as well. So I guess while you were talking, Charlie, that's what I was looking at, and that's why I got distracted.
Yeah, it's interesting. And of course, today has sent this quote from the Smithsonian site where he has a letter that he writes that he says he was really pleased with this picture. It says, "Have just done a good picture. I'm quite pleased with it." And again, it's really interesting if you've read the letters that Van Gogh would have written to his brother Theodore. It's exactly the kind of thing that he would have been saying. So I just like that kind of repetition of ideas that you see with that concept and what the importance that Van Gogh might have played in his early development.
The style also is I heard somewhere else is Haim Sutin's style that he sort of adopted, because I at the time Haim Sutin was really really famous for his style, and so he's building some of the buildings that we'll see. I don't know if we have any buildings in that style, but he kind of started to follow that style as well. He was sort of understudying and
Right. And for me, Soutine, I think of Soutine as kind of these really sort of almost grotesque images, these kind of bloody meat type images. He used to go to an abattoir and paint some of the scenes there. But there's other work of his, which is not quite as, to me, I find it a little bit repellent, but, his other work is a little bit calmer, not quite so blood-filled. And you can see he's using those big brushstrokes that Soutine might have been using, for example.
And we see him here. I think Remy, you were saying earlier that you get that Basquiat energy from him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like he's just one of those souls that just has a sense of self from very early on. And even though, there's been these ups and downs, I think it's a very kind of classical story of an artist where you set out on this path with passion, and you slide off the edge every now and again, or you have to do all of these different jobs to maintain body and soul. And so I think anybody that is an artist will recognize those themes within their own life, that struggle to get your art out there and seen and sold, and at the same time be true to yourself, and at the same time explore all that is on offer, and then show your audience what you've learned, and to create a style that is then also unique to you.
You also think about just like with that picture on the right, you think about what a wonderful time it must have been to be a young artist, to be in Europe, and to be a Black artist in Europe was very, very different. You were just much more accepted and able to work in some ways. These are just idyllic times. I mean, I want to be there painting Chartres in the middle of France, and being along this river. It's just a wonderful photo. It shows kind of like a moment in time that must have been really great for him.
Yeah.
I think also just kind of the picture on the left is in the United States, and the one on the right is in France. And it's just, I think we're going to get to more of his life and some of the things that he had to deal with in these pictures. I mean, it does stand out to me that he is the only Black person, and in both photographs. And, he is someone who grew up in South Carolina, where the racial divide was huge. So you did not really, segregation was, the law at, during the period where he was born. And so just this very separation from his African American identity for several decades, that he later returns to, and I won't go too much into it. But I think it's important to kind of think about that and think about his self-conception, kind of traveling during this time of deep segregation and Jim Crow, being the role in the United States, and him being able to kind of leave the confines of African American culture.
This portrait, I just had to add this. This is it's a bit of a surprise for the docents, and just to show how he depicted himself in so many different ways. And this is one of the ways he painted himself. And this is a self-portrait. And this is one of his early works. And we have arranged this in chronological order, so you'll be able to see the different styles as the years progress. And so. I mean, we see this. This is a beautiful painting. At the same time, we see that intenseness that he has. It's a classic work for me. And then we move on to this one. Remy, this is your favorite, right?
Oh, yeah. I love this piece. Just there's a coarseness and a roughness and a kind of brutishness that is beautiful, to me, about this particular piece. And this is woodblock. But the thing that grabbed me the most about this piece was the blues, and it just pulled me into the indigos, the indigos of West Africa, the indigos of Mali. And so anytime I'm, when I see these blues, it immediately takes me home for those places. And then just to, like the hair, the little tufts of hair, and his, like, maybe he hasn't combed his hair in a couple of days. And when we don't comb our hair in a couple of days, the natty dreads start to sprout out underneath this beautiful blue cap, and almost the furrow of the brow as well, which for many artists, we often have our brow furrowed just thinking about trying to get details or ideas or whatever. So, yeah.
There's a similar piece that he did of his wife as well. And at first this was a little rough for me as I saw it, and then I saw how he had made her portrait as well in this woodcut style, and it was just so beautiful. And I think the way he sees himself, we talked about this quite a bit, the way he sees himself, how does he portray himself? I mean, we looked at this right here. Now we're looking at this. And I think he finds beauty in the process of rejecting some things and adopting other things. And we will see that throughout his work.
And I wonder how much he, when he plays with all of, first of all, I think any artist that plays with so many different styles and is able to master them is really the master of the arts. I think that's what a master of the arts really is about. And obviously he is one. But also, I wonder when he's playing with these different styles, whether it's his inner self and outer self, and whether, I don't know which one would be which, but just thinking about the process that all of us go through going to any art class when we're going to do some self-portrait. There's always that balance between our feelings that come up inside ourselves as we put those marks on the page, and then what we then put on the page as a representation, whether it be abstract or figurative, what ends up landing on the page for other people to see. What narrative, what story do we want to share? So, I've really gotten to think about, that's an American word. You guys are guys, I see you infiltrating me. I really got to think a lot about, the process of having a portrait and doing a portrait, and what that may be for an artist.
Yeah.
I think also, kind of one of the things to point out is the previous image, the almost photorealistic painting is from when he was a student still, and so this is definitely from the imposition of the academy defining what the style of painting should be, and trying to be as much like a photograph as possible. And I think in the image that we started off that Charlie showed, as soon as he leaves the confines of the campus, he immediately starts experimenting, wildly in so many different styles, which gets to the one that you were just on, which I absolutely adore so much. This of all the images that we've looked at of his, I want this one. I want to own it. I just think it's beautiful. I think, again, just in contrast from that very high depth of capturing the light and capturing a photographic image, and then he goes into the wood block print where he kind of just discards that, and then here he brings in more of an expressionistic perspective on it. So much color, so much movement. We talked about him in the smoking jacket, with his pipe. And for me, that conjures my grandfather liked to smoke his pipe. So whenever I see a pipe, I immediately start to think of the scent, the sweet scent of tobacco smoke that I recall as a child. And also I just love the way that he is staring back at us as the viewer, very, very confident in himself and very, self-assured. He's definitely thinking about, modes of modernism in art and expressionism. I love that there's this doorway or window in the background, and you can tell that there's some source of light coming into the space. You can't quite tell what it is, because he's not attempting to perfectly replicate it as it appears with his eye. And it just, I don't know, I just love everything about this, the movements, the colors.
Dimitri, can you also talk about the brush, kind of how the
yes,
paint is
and then
applied?
the brush, and so then I do get really like caught up in the whole meta thing of the fact that he is painting and has decided to paint the paintbrush into his painting. So it's like he's as you pointed out, the cool Basquiat, slightly detached character, but the paintbrush is really important to him. And I even think about, like, is this the paintbrush that you primarily painted, made this painting with, and how it features so prominently in the painting. My eye always goes down to it.
Yeah, and the style that earlier Chaim Soutine style that I mentioned, it's also it shows again this swirly kind of application of paint and just um, pulled. It just I don't know. Yeah, like it feels like the subjects are pulled, and that's what it reminds me of.
And then there's also just the act of mixing the paint directly on the canvas. So he's for the most part not mixing onto his palette. You can see where the paint starts to merge and blend on the canvas directly.
Exactly.
Oh, and am
Dimitri,
I on this one as well?
I think you might be on this one, but I want to point out how music is so important in all of this work. And if we can, and I think music kept on coming back when Dimitri was talking about this. There's a song that you keep on going back to. It's just all throughout the music and how it comes up. And I would like us to kind of see the rhythm in his work. And what it resembles to and what it represents in terms of American music and Black American music. And so, yeah.
Yeah,
Go
so
for
I
it,
mean,
Dimitri.
just kind of just I think it's important to contextualize his life with this one as well. So, he goes off to France to study art, and then he travels around Europe, and then because World War II is coming on, he feels the need to come back to the United States. And then again, as we can see, a massive shift in his style, occurs. And for me, I have to think about this person who grew up in the South, thinking of South Carolina, the intensity of South Carolina as a Black person, and growing up in poverty, then goes to Europe, where he is totally separated from his culture for what, like 2 decades almost. So yeah, nearly, or I guess 15 years ish, that he's in Europe, and completely removed from African American culture. He comes back, and then he gets super duper interested in African American culture and what that means, what it means to paint like an African American, what it means to embrace his identity as an African American. And I think that this image really indicates that there's a rhythm to it. There's a movement. The color palette completely changes. He's really flattening the plane when he moves into this style. And yeah, the song for me that comes up is the sound of the men working on the chain
Working
gang,
the chain
and
gang.
that exactly, and that who that keeps happening in it. And
Yes.
you see the rhythm of the lines and the colors, how they interact with each other, and the bending of the figures and the shapes that he creates. And go ahead, Remy.
I was just going to say, also just adding to that, commenting on what is happening to African Americans from the point of view that he has been in Europe for 20 years almost, and now coming back, and being almost an outsider, somebody who has come from the outside world and lives in America here myself. It's the experience of looking at my fellow people is not the same as having the experience alongside them.
Mm.
That's it. That's such an important point. I think that speaks to so much of his life, and and what we see, not only his life path, but also how his art transforms as well.
Yeah. Ashley asks, do we know if there were any influential artists? I'm sorry. Oh, I saw you were about to read it.
Okay. Do we know if any? Yeah, I was just sorry. I was waiting for Dimitri to finish. Do we know if there were any influential artists during this period of return that shaped his style, reflecting African American life?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I feel like Charlie was going to address that a little bit later, but I mean, I can just kind of point out, when he comes to America, there is this new art foundation called the Harmon Foundation. A wealthy real estate mogul created this foundation, and started to award African Americans an annual award, of which he was a recipient of that. And Langston Hughes comes out of this. Hal Woodruff. I mean, you kind of name Sergeant Johnson. You name any of the most well-known artists of the late 1920s through the 40s, African American, they kind of went through the Harmon Foundation. And so, yeah, he definitely found, if folks go back to last week's or 2 weeks ago, when we had this art talk, we named some of the artists, and showed some of them that also went through Harmon, and had very similar experiences. So yeah, he had an exchange with African American artists at the time, for sure.
I also would like to say at this point that he was really influenced by African art, African masks and African art, African depiction as African spirituality, African American spirituality. So that's he's highly influenced by that at this time as well. So you will see, kind of the resemblance of the masks and the shapes and those kind of things as we progress.
But also his palette changes, and a lot of it comes from, well, here we go. I mean, we can,
Okay.
talk about it, right now. I mean, this is just a wonderful, wonderful painting. And what we see here is, we see this couple. They're having a night on the town, and his color palette is starting to get influenced by some of the other artists in the Harlem Renaissance. He's starting to change what colors, away from sort of the classic European model that he learned under, and he's really starting to use a variety of palettes, and his themes change as well. And this is just a really intimate portrait that he's doing here, which I personally find very charming. A couple of things I really want to point out about this particular painting, and Ralph Gordon is writing Picasso-esque, and you can certainly see how he's starting to play with those changes in the planes, right? So if you look at the floorboards, for example, normally if we were to follow the rules of perspective, those floorboards would actually point backwards. I mean, imagine railroad tracks are disappearing into the horizon. That's what we should see. He's very deliberately turning those towards us, which is really in complete contrast to what he quote unquote should be doing. So this is a deliberate change in his style. But there's just, I love these sort of mishmash of legs that are underneath the table. So we see this, we see his legs, we see her legs for sure. Then we see what I think are the brown legs of the table. And then we see these purple legs. And I love it because, well, you could say, all right, the table had brown and purple legs. Or you could say perhaps it's some sort of dress or skirt, I guess a skirt really, that she's wearing that has these tails behind. But I love the idea that you get this entanglement underneath the table. That's really wonderful. And then, something that you'll see in another painting of his is the way her legs are open, right? If we read that body language, it's literally an opening up. But at the same time, we have this guy, and if we look carefully at his eyes are kind of pointing to the right, to his right, our left, and so he's kind of scoping out the rest of the club at the same time. So again, I love a work of art that tells me a story, or that I could write a story about. And I certainly could come up with an interesting story behind this particular work.
Yeah. Thanks, Charlie. That's such a good piece. Oh man. Okay. I think Remy should lead us with this one. I think you're muted, Remy.
I am muted.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, I love this one too, because the vibrancy of color. With the yellow, we're looking at this almost like a neon yellow, and even these days, not many artists are that bold enough to use neon type colors as well. It makes me kind of chuckle and laugh when I look at this one, when I see the blue hair. And it just kind of takes me back to England, where back in the day we would see these older white ladies with their purple rinses. When they were going grey, instead of going grey, they would put this blue tint or pink tint. This was way before people were doing blue and green right now. This is way back in the day, about 1,000 years ago. But when I see him with this blue hair and, just playing with color wheels and playing with tone in the hands as well, tone of the skin. And, I think again, the way he's dressed himself in this picture, he's wearing his waistcoat, he's wearing a tie and a shirt, very formal. And again, I think it's another kind of nod to making people realize that he wants to be taken as a serious artist. He wants to be taken as somebody who has been trained, which was a big deal at the time. I think it still is a big deal. Often in our professions, there's that little competition between those of us who are not trained and those of us who are trained, those of us who went to certain foundations as opposed to other foundations. I think that speaks a lot, because the foundations that you go through, slant your work, and then when you come out, then there's the journey of the artist's journey begins. You go through your training, then the artist's journey begins to work on your craft, make your money, make your statement, and find your own philosophy and your own narrative. And I feel like this is, again, where he's constantly in that almost like mercurial constantly changing, constantly challenging himself, constantly looking for a story to tell, and then maybe finding a style through which to tell that. A lot of the time we compare African American artists with European artists, but I also feel like it's really important to look at us independently, even though Picasso and all of those people, it's kind of side by side. They were there because they got the glory, but they were also moved and inspired by Africanness, although I think it doesn't often get spoken upon.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, he didn't find the fame that he wanted and the fame that he sought out when he came back to the US, and his art was not selling at the time, and you know, a lot of places were telling him that his art was not selling, not particularly his art, but just because of the economic times of the Great Depression and all of that, it just wasn't selling, and that did not sit well with him, of course, because he held himself at a very high level artistically, and so what all of these pieces that we see, he actually did not benefit from them. Maybe his earlier work, but their later work, he did not benefit financially from them. He was actually pretty financially unstable, as well as his health and his mental health. He was unstable all throughout his life. So let's go to church.
Okay. This, of course, is some of his later work as he begins to identify his style and also his roots, you know, South Carolina. And it's interesting. I think Charlie had mentioned a while back how he pairs things. You have two people facing front, two people facing back, you know, two crosses or pairs of things. But at any rate, we see it appears that people are coming from the country and on the way to church with you know, oxen drawing the cart. What sticks? What it's a let's see, what we look at are these bold, like color blocks, lines that intersect differently. I think Charlie might speak to that, but I guess for me, it's identifying with agriculture, which was big in that area, but also spirituality. We had talked about his use of blues, and I think this form is really what they say. This is maybe a turning point on a lot of his work, and returning again back to his roots. There was something I wanted to say, but it's sort of like abstraction, that things are very suggestive, and in his imagery you really want to understand sort of what the meaning of the pairs is, and how he treats for example, the painting that Charlie spoke to in terms of the couple, how the imagery is split. If you notice, the walls in the back are two different colors. What is the significance? I would be curious to find out, and how he's expressing that through his work as well. Would anyone like to say something? There is a Q&A here. Did his wife come back to the US with him? I think initially, but didn't she leave and go back home? Is that correct?
You know, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure she even came here, but I want to make sure. I'll look it up and let you know. But I'm not sure she actually came back to the U.S. I know that she passed away from breast cancer and
Early 40s or something?
early 40s. Yeah, that is a great question. I know I read it, but I completely forgot what I read. And Aswan, thank you for that. And the pair thing, I did not realize until now. And I'm seeing 2 and 2 and 2. And what I wonder what significance it has spiritually, the 2, the number 2.
Well, if we're going to church,
Yeah.
the animals went in by two,
Oh, okay.
and
Thank you.
Noah and the ark, and so and the oxen and that would be I mean, I think we can all reference something, but it is called going to church, and so
Yeah.
I wonder. I put it forward that maybe
Mm.
that might be a play on that whole scenario.
And Aswan, I actually wanted you to discuss something that you discussed when we had our own conversation about the breaking of the lines, because I thought that was really fascinating what you were saying.
I think that
You know,
was you and that.
well, no, what I'm talking about is, you see these very, very strong vertical lines. Well, just in terms of composition, again, if you're a person that follows strict rules of perspective, which lots of people at this point in time and in art history are not, this doesn't make sense, right? You wouldn't, again, have those parallel straight lines going off into the horizon. But, you were mentioning about how, you see those parallel lines, and then just when you see that brown diagonal, one of the lines stops. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that, because I found that really fascinating what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm I'm not sure, but what the other thing I think we discussed was the look of like quilt.
Mm.
In some of this, the rows, it looks like rows where you would plant. Also, the use of color, the blue hooves on the oxen, things that not quite very different. Where is he pulling his palette? Why the use of color very differently? And we'll see that in some later work similar to this. In terms of the line, I can't recall.
You know what, Aswan? Now that I think of it, it was Dimitri. Dimitri was talking about quilts and lines. I'm gonna just
right.
I'm just gonna
I was just
put him on the spot.
I was just hoping you guys would do it, but yeah, I just noticed if you just put your attention to the right side of the screen, there's kind of the path from the house, and then there's these darker brown lines that go through, and they don't connect with each other, and that is something you find in quilts of the South, more I guess anywhere throughout that. And it's a tradition that comes from West Africa. And I learned about this from the quilts of Gee's Bend, or Gee's Bend, however you want to say it. People say it different ways. And really it comes from West Africa, where you don't have the lines connect, because it's thought that if a line goes all the way through, then evil spirits can go through. And you see that in Ghanaian as well as in Nigerian textiles. Also throughout the Sahel region of West Africa, it's intentional that the lines don't cross over for that reason. And we know that his wife, Holka, was a textile artist, and he grew up in South Carolina, where the quilting tradition is huge. So, he had to have an awareness of this.
And
I love this comment from Marie Coppola, who actually is a colleague of mine at SF MoMA. So hello, Marie. But she says, it was influenced by folk art. The primary colors, the subject matter, figures are outlined, and she really likes the quilt connection. And it's really true, because Holka, as Dimitri just said, she was a quilt, a textile artist.
Textile artist.
more than anything else. And she was a really interesting person. First of all, she was 16 years older than he was, and so she had sort of an interesting relationship. I think in many ways, she had almost a mentor-mentee relationship to him, because she really introduced him to a lot of Scandinavian art, for example. And so I think it's really hard to not talk about this work and not think about her influence and her insistence on his paying attention to the folk art. And I think this is a really interesting painting, just from a lot of perspectives. To me, this is a very American painting. And I don't know if any of our panel, or either panelists or people out in the audience, can think of anyone in Europe, for example, at that time in the late 30s, early 40s, who's doing work like that. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of anyone. It really, to me, evokes this American art, and very specifically Black American art that he's very deliberately trying to infuse. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Definitely sorry about that, Aswin. Go ahead. Sounds
I'm
like
sorry.
you and I want to speak at the same time. I like it.
Rather than no one speaking, but just a takeoff too from Dimitri speaking about the lines and intersecting. In terms of belief systems, there's a lot of blue in his work. And it was noticeable even in his self-portrait that we saw, the woodblock, but also here I see it even on the hooves and that sort of thing. And that was sort of another form of protection, I think, as well, in addition to, as Dimitri spoke to, the lines intersecting and not continuing.
And it also, immediately when I look at it, it reminds me of the applique style of quilting, which is, it's a message. And we talk about how complex his paintings are, yet looking simple, as if a child could do them. But at the same time, the complexities, as you spend time with it, as you dig inside, and you start finding these gems, right? And so at the same time, the same thing happens with applique and quilt art. There are a lot of messages that had been passed on, a lot through the quilt. We talk about the secret messages being embedded into quilts and embedded into appliques and other things like that. And it's the same way I see what you said, Aswan, is that the blue and the white, the colors that keep on coming back from the continent to the Caribbean and also to this North America, is that what it makes me think of is that this life and afterlife symbolism that keeps on coming back. And I see that here, and I know that it repeats itself to this day in the South. So yeah, I think this is a powerful paint. I didn't think we were going to spend that much time with it. That's the beauty of it. I really like it.
I also wanted to add, and I think it's relevant to this piece as well, is the vibrancy of color. And one of the things that I feel for him must have been freeing is to go from all of that kind of drab, dingy browns and of the Europeans that were often painting in those darker, dull colors, to then explore these vibrant colors of in this particular one of jazz and music and stuff, because he had been away from his culture and things had changed quite dramatically, I should imagine, for him as well, coming back. And then just to add to that in terms of the spirituality of it, is the the prodigal daughter or son returns, or the ancestor returns, or this whole concept of coming home. And in the previous one, where it's called Going to Church, I don't know that there's anything in Europe like the Black church experience that is here in the United States. So the fact that he would have been away from that and maybe go back to the Black church and be embraced in whether the music of the Black church, whether it be the jazz of the day on the streets and the dancing, he may not have been experiencing that rich, vibrant experience that is on offer here in the Black communities, that is not always present in the European experience.
And also I want to say quickly, my apologies. This piece has the wrong title. and I am putting it in the chat right now. The correct title is Jitterbug, and he did a whole series, but I won't. This is Charlie's piece. I'm not gonna take it, but thank you for that, Remy. I messed up. I'll figure it out next time.
Oh, that's okay. But there's just another great example of that reverse perspective, where you see the lines coming. But the things that pop out for me in this are just the wonderful, wonderful colors. You can't help but look at that very bright yellow dress. And then he does this brilliant thing, which is he puts the stripes of the man's suit in the exact same color. So it just kind of puts them both together. But my favorite part about this is, and Marie says she loves the red hat. Yes, and of course, it's right in the center too, or just slightly off center. But for me, just like I love a really good story in a painting or a work of art, period, I always love it when artists sort of make you evoke a different sense. So yes, we're using our eyes when we look at this. But then we see these instruments in the background, and the instruments are put sort of, to one side and the other. There's no connecting sense. So you get this oral, as an audio thing going on while you're looking at this painting at the same time. So yes, we're using our eyes, but yes, we can almost imagine our ears while we're looking at this painting. We can hear what's going on. We can hear the sound of the music. Now that soundtrack is obviously going to be different for each person, but I love that it evokes that. It tickles that part of our brain that makes us go beyond just looking. And
what music? What song? I wonder.
Title.
Yeah, I am so sorry about that. What music? I
what
wonder
song
what
do I
music
hear?
comes. Yeah, what song do you hear?
Louis Armstrong.
Really?
Just given, yeah, it's again, that probably wouldn't have been the hot music at the time.
Too.
Yeah, so but for me, I see more of the dancing, for me, I don't think of Dizzy Gillespie so much. I don't know, maybe I'm undating myself, maybe I'm too young to really say this, but I don't necessarily think of Dizzy Gillespie as dance music.
Yeah.
For me, it's more cerebral, and you listen to it, and it's very cerebral, I guess, is really the best word. I think of Louis Armstrong and going on in the background, but take your choice. That you don't have to listen to my soundtrack. Count Basie is what Dimitri says.
Basie,
absolutely.
Dimitri. Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely
Absolutely.
sounds like jazz. Anyway,
Yeah.
It would be some.
It looks like
it's not
jazz.
Mantovani. It's not Mantovani, I can tell you. Anyone even know what Mantovani is? I think
I have no idea. I just smiled, Charlie.
Oh, Mantovani was like the most vanilla of music that came out like in the 50s and early 60s.
Oh, really? Okay.
Trust me, it's not that painful. Elevator music is what Ralph says, and he's right.
Yeah.
Now this is a very interesting painting, and it's very controversial. And so I think that's why today assigned it to me.
Via Kitson.
Via Kitson, that's right. It's so so I think for this painting, as I love to do, and I hope people are okay with that, I love to just throw on the historical moment of the time. So this painting is based on the
43?
Okay, so it was actually 43. Yeah, the race riot that happened in Harlem. Now, this was the second of 3 major race riots that would happen in Harlem. The previous one happened in 1935. The next one would happen in 1964. And so kind of the story that goes along with this is that there was a woman who checked into the Braddock Hotel. The Braddock Hotel was where all of the great musicians and actresses and actors, with Black ones, would stay in the 1920s. And this museum this hotel falls into great disrepair by the 1940s. So this woman goes and she checks in to the hotel, and when she gets into her room, she's like, no, this will not do. So she comes back downstairs, demands her money back. Apparently she had tipped the elevator boy $1, and she wanted her dollar back, and you know, they refused. And so a white cop was called in, the beat cop that would come through. And he violently tries to arrest her for disturbing the peace. Well, at the same time, another woman is in the lobby and she's waiting for her son, who is a soldier who just returned from World War II. So this is what's happening at this time. He had already finished his tour of duty. And when he comes in, he intervenes. No one knows how the story goes. Apparently, the cop drops his nightstick. We don't really know what happened. Um, anyway, the soldier gets shot. Well, the rumors spread throughout Harlem. You also have to understand like the context of Harlem. Harlem in 1910 was 90% white, 10% black. By 1940, because of the Great Migration, the numbers flipped. So it's 90% black, 10% white. However, all of the businesses, all of the real estate is owned by white people still. Because of World War II pressures on the country because of manufacturing, prices are going up and landlords are charging an outrageous rents to try to make up for it. So Harlem is already under lots and lots of tension when this goes on. They think that the soldier was killed who had just gone to fight for this country. And so this gigantic riot goes on. Now back to the painting. Johnson,
that was awesome, Dimitri.
Thank you.
That was so amazing.
So then to get back to the painting, the interesting controversial part is that Johnson reconceives all the cops as black when that's not what actually happened. 6 black people died, over 400 were injured. Over 6,000 cops were from New York City were sent to Harlem. 8,000 National Guard members. So this riot went on for 2 straight days, August 1st and 2nd of that year. And it's just an interesting thing that he switched the racial identity of the cops. You know, we can imagine at this time there were very few black cops in the city at the time, and so I don't know. My thinking of what I said at the very beginning was, you know, his lack of connection to African American history and culture, not really having an understanding of what went on. We also see he's got liquor bottles strewn throughout the ground, you know, and it's almost like he blames liquor and excessive drunkenness on what happened, and not really understanding this long history of Jim Crow, racial segregation, and then the ensuing economic pressure that gets put on African Americans. My grandfather was a soldier in World War II, so I know these stories of all the soldiers who would go off to fight the Nazis on behalf of the United States to, you know, solidify their relationship and their position within the United States, and coming back to find that they couldn't find jobs, that, you know, that progress really hadn't happened yet, you know, civil rights still hadn't been granted. So, you know, it's just an interesting thing to think about towards the later part of his working career, kind of his perception of what was going on.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And also, I want to go back to the earlier question. Did his wife come back to the US? She did, and she actually died in New York, I found out, in 1944. And now things are going to change a little bit also how he sees the world. And this painting happened, this riot happened in 1943, and this painting was painted in 1943. I can't imagine his life being easy at this time where he is on the verge of losing his wife. And so that internal and external struggle that he is having, and he has a white wife, a white European wife, also living in New York with her. And I wonder what that was like for him. And I know that after that, also his mental health starts to decline. And not that the controversy should, any of this should be accounted into or out of the controversy of this painting, but also I think it does give it a additional dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Aswan, you like this one. You're muted. I think you're muted.
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I really, this one actually sort of played mind tricks on me. Again, when we deal with abstraction, sometimes your mind puts in place things that are not there. So this is a ferry boat, and I was wondering if the audience had any comments in terms of looking at this. These look like young people that are gathered for the boat ride. I'm just waiting to see if anybody will and what their impression is, because let's see, this is 4043. Okay. So it's again sort of an impression of elements that are there. And the assumption was he was in New York. So I'm, let's see, it says New York skyline in the background, Ralph says, yeah. You know what I was looking for, or I placed in here, was sort of the Statue of Liberty. What about the watercolor? The color
yeah.
of the
Eric says the water is not blue.
yes, that's yeah. Are we on a boat? Are we on the pier? Waiting for a boat? Yeah. It was just a lot of things that I found my mind was filling in that weren't necessarily there. So that sort of amazed me about the piece. And he, I guess, does that with other things, but this one in particular, I think that let's see, that the young people are on a boat. Are they on the ferry itself? Okay, Ralph. Yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking at first. They were on the ferry, and we weren't sure, was that a tugboat in the front? It had me thinking of placing things, but the initial impression was I saw a complete picture. Yeah. Or at least I imagined a complete picture. So I think the idea of being able to fill in through your own filters, whatever they might be, to complete the story that's being told in the painting. Would anyone else like to comment?
I think one thing that came up was the red moon. And automatically, just like you said, I'm like, that's a moon. That's not the sun. And then, and I was just like, okay, maybe it's the sun. But there was no question of what the sun looks like or what the moon actually looks like. And also, that one third thing that you brought up, us one. I see it here as well as kind of dividing a painting into three planes and connecting them.
And Marie mentioned,
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, one of our guests mentioned that her guess is that he did this on purpose to mess with our minds. The city is not on the horizon line. The colors of water, the skies are off. It adds to the interest. I'm sorry if I. Well.
No, not at all.
I also think it's also really interesting to see water. Like, we automatically make water blue. We automatically make the sky blue when in fact they are not. Many times. And I think the interesting thing for me, looking at what I'm assuming this massive area would be, is by not making the water blue or green or one of the colors that we know it to be, is it changes the actual texture of what they're on. It's like this could be on the pier on sand, as opposed to then if it's sand, then what does that do to the horizon and the buildings in the horizon? So I think it's really interesting how he uses color to change texture.
I think it's also just really interesting that even though it's not blue or green, I mean, at least my first instinct is to just fill it in as water. And for me, I find that really fascinating that it does not have to look like what you know that it should look like. I mean, I guess if this is actually New
Right.
York, Charlie, it's going to be a little bit of a greenish brown anyway, right? But you know, it's just this interesting thing of like he doesn't have to do that, and yet we know. At least my first thought is like, I know what this is without it, and that's an interesting visual way, like Ralph said, to just take artistic license. Like I get that.
And also what
Sid,
Carol says too is that the flag supports the idea. So, because I know he uses symbolism in his works to some degree, and the flag, she was thinking, supports the idea of the Statue of Liberty. The blue rope goes with a boat. The blue rope goes with a boat. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't cut you off, Dimitri?
You know, can we also talk about how the face doesn't have any features as well? I think that there's a person, and I automatically did not even question, you know, like he doesn't have any eyes or nose or anything, and yeah.
again, it
You know,
makes me
that's
think of her textile work, you know, Holka's textile work. That, you know, my wife is a quilter. I mean, you could almost make this entire painting by cutting out patches. You know, they're put in blocks of solid color, if you will. So you could literally outline this, cut it out, put it on a quilt. So I think it's really interesting. But one of the things I wanted to mention was that, you know, if you look at that orange line that comes along the right side of that, you know, we're seeing presumably the sun or the moon reflecting on that odd water. And to me, it really reminded me of Edvard Munch. And again, I have to sort of go back to, you know, to his wife, having introduced him to, you know, Norwegian and Scandinavian artists. I'm putting in the chat a link to two of Munch's paintings that you can see where he puts a horizontal reflection of the moon. Again, if you think of it from a perspective point of view, that doesn't make sense, right? You should see that spread out in front of you. It doesn't. But then look at what Munch is doing, and then you look at what Johnson's doing here. I can't help but think that he was very strongly influenced by Munch, who was, you know, again, Johnson started out as an expressionist, and Munch, you know, would have been really, really important in that movement at that time.
I also noticed the absence of the stars on the flag, on the American flag as well.
Oh,
So it just
I did
seems
not
like
see
all of these things are missing, or maybe he's missed all of these things. Maybe the stars he misses from the sky, or the water's gone from the ocean. The Statue of Liberty is gone, which is a kind of major statement on social justice for us. You know, I don't know. That's just me. Does.
And we see that incompleted line again.
Also,
The incompleted lines.
Ralph says Impression Sunrise by Monet may have been an influence as well. Oh.
So I didn't think I was talking about this one, but I'm happy to talk about this on the latest list. It had me down, but I think this is also just a lovely, very simple painting. And you know, we used the term when we were talking earlier that he goes to a naive style. And you know, what we're talking about when we use that term, naive style, is typically it's people who have not had significant training in an art school. So think Frida Kahlo, you know, or think Rousseau, if you think in the prior 2 centuries ago. You know, you start thinking about these people who didn't really have classical training. Now, here's someone who did, right? He did go to Europe and study. So he really chooses to do this style. And it kind of makes me think of that Picasso quote, you know, who said, you know, it took me, you know, 4 years to paint like Raphael. It took me the rest of my life to paint like a child. And so it's this idea that this is the art that he wants to create. This is exactly what he wants to create. It doesn't make sense from a perspectival version, you know, or image. You know, it doesn't make sense from all those. And yet this is what he's trying to do. It's a very deliberate sense. And one of the things I love about this particular painting is that, you see this girl, woman, hard to say because there's a little, makes me think that it's a girl. And her elbows are really in tight. You think of the body language of someone that's doing that, right? They're in tight. They don't want to talk to you. But at the bottom, her feet are open again. So yeah, she's trying to give this impression like, don't talk to me, leave me alone. And yet, if you figure out the right things to say to her, she'll talk to you. It's a really nice double image that or a kind of a yin yang image that he's giving of this girl on the stool. And I really like that.
I think also just contextualizing it within his story. Here I go. I didn't know I was so into history, but the series of paintings is after his wife dies, and so he returns back home to South Carolina for the first time in 14 years, and so these are all paintings at this time in 1944 that he's making of his family members. Who he didn't even know. So this little girl is probably less than 14 years old. So it's his first interaction with her. And so that also adds this interesting layer for me. It's like the prodigal child returning home and trying to, discover who he is and where he came from.
Dimitri, the whole time I was thinking that how very, very essential, kind of not essential, but it's very much a story of wanting a diaspora story. His story is very much a diaspora story in a sense that even his birth father, what thought to be a white person, and he absolutely 100% identified as an African American, and all of it is just going to Europe, coming back. The earlier photo that you mentioned, how he was the only Black person. It's belonging and not belonging. This kind of very, very much a diaspora story, and also connecting back to for inspiration, connecting back to Africa. And we have to mention that he traveled quite a bit too with his wife. They traveled a lot, and so wanting to connect back to Africa, it's a very I think there's many of us that share that experience in so many ways and on so many layers. And so when he comes back to reconnect to his family and still feeling this disconnect and distance, it really resonated to me on a different level.
Yeah, it resonates with me as well, because there really is no going back, is there? When you go home, home has changed and so are you. And I think one of the things that definitely gets reflected through his work is the many changes that he goes through, and how long it would have taken him to travel his travels, and what travel then does to us as the artists, what we see, what we absorb. We're kind of like sponges, and we pick up these things along the way that then, that become part of this new us, and then that becomes part of our work to share. So yeah, I definitely resonate with you and he today.
We have a couple more where we have to. I would like to ask folks to stay with us. They're just so amazing. Then the next three that we have, and so I would like to invite Dimitri to talk about this one.
I won't go into it too long, except for that when I saw this for the first time, it absolutely just thrilled me. I love this one. And for me, even without seeing the title, the first thing that came to my mind was Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. The folk song, which also has to do with escaping slavery, by the way, in case folks didn't know that. But I was, in addition to that, for me, it was just really interesting to learn about the fact that this, from the Smithsonian, that this was revolutionary, and the fact that angels were not painted Black at this time. It was just not something that was seen. And so he has this whole chorus of all Black female angels that are welcoming this soul into heaven. So the story is that it was a man who the chariot has picked up and carried into heaven, and when he gets dropped off, he's greeted by this chorus of angels. And I love his just very quick treatment of the purple wings that they have. And I don't know, this painting just brings me so much life and energy and joy. I think is really gorgeous, and definitely talks about his, connects to his desire to connect to spirituality again after the passing of his wife, his return to South Carolina to visit his folks and learn more about that. And then, he then begins to dive into Negro spirituality, is what it would be called at the time.
Thank you for that. And this one, Lamentation, it's a little bit darker. There's a lighter version, and the lighter version is not within public domain, so I couldn't bring it to you. But you see the crucifixion, you see, and I think it didn't occur to me that it was Black Jesus, because I immediately thought that was Jesus, and I didn't think, oh, that's he's Black. Why is he Black? And I realized why that was. And I think of the Coptic Orthodox, the Ethiopian Coptic Orthodox paintings. And in this one, there's also a note about how, being on your knees and raising your hands up, sort of lamentation of the African-American spirituality. And so just showing that. And then I thought, okay, well, there's this thing of, I think it's used in writing, but I remember learning about this as simultaneous dimensions of view, or I forget the exact term, but you can see everything is just kind of flat and pushed and squished, and just there's nothing hiding. It's right there. Everything is there. All the angles, or the back, everything is here. It reminds me of the Egyptian kind of paintings as well. And so I looked in, and these were the paintings that it was reminding me of. These are the Coptic Orthodox Church paintings. Now, if you look at the one on the left, on your right, on the left of St. John, you can see how everything is just two-dimensional. Everything is set. The coffee pots, those two dark pots that you see on his table or on his wall, on the floor, who knows? There is not much depth in terms of distance. And so those are coffee pots, and you see knives. And I don't know what the other two are. I'm not very good with stories of saints, but he is scribing something, and you can see his hands, and you can see his face and his eyes. And if we go back to this painting, you start to see the resemblance. I don't know if that was his necessarily his inspiration, but I see the color palettes, the way that the eyes are made, the way that the hands, if you look at the hands of the Black Jesus, and I'm assuming that's Mary and the woman that found that whole biblical story, and the two thieves that were hung with him. I don't know why they're much darker in this image. Also, we go back to that whole controversial ways of how he makes things controversial a little bit. I don't know why the thieves are in a much darker shade than Jesus. But you see that kind of painting here, that two-dimensional, multiple simultaneous vantage points. That's what it's called, multiple simultaneous vantage points. It's used in writing, but it's very true in paintings as well. Yeah.
Now, today I see, let's see, I am. Okay, I see that the three women also have the halo. And one of his earlier pieces, I think he showed when he returned to New York, was called Jesus and the Three Marys. And I'm just curious if this was like the same painting and renamed, or if it was, if that's who he's depicting in these pictures, and who those three Marys might be. But it's also
Yes.
the ladders in here.
The Jacob's ladder, right? Is that
Yeah,
right?
Jacob's
Yeah.
ladder, possibly reference, or you know, they had taken him down, but as
And you know what? This is my favorite because of the textiles. I think that's when you pointed these out last time. Is just the textile of the what the Marys are wearing. It's just I've never seen anything like it. I think even when we see look at the Coptic paintings, we don't see a lot of patterns. We don't see much going on in terms of patterns in the textile design. But I love this. I would like to hang this in my house. And I grew up, of course, with religious pictures all over our walls, and so that would be really nice. I can't afford it, of course not, but it would be really nice. Yeah. Charlie, how you feel about this one?
Oh, I
think
think
he's going to
this is
swat
just.
somebody with that fly swatter. That's
I've got one in the next room, Remy.
maybe you're going
Careful,
to get swatted.
careful. I'll go get it. So, you know, this is another one from that period that Dimitri was talking about, where you know he suffered the death of his wife. He goes back to his family, and then he starts to do all these portraits of people, either within his family or within his community. And so it's just, again, a lovely portrait. She's got this fly swatter, presumably to keep the flies off the baby that she's, you know, been put in charge of. And, you know, anyone who's been, and usually an older sister, I guess sometimes an older brother, but usually an older sister is always told to take care of the baby. And, you know, here she's taking this role really seriously and guarding this child. And just, I love the simplicity of her dress. Again, notice her body language, you know, that arm that's kept very, very close to her right hip and side, you know, and yet the left one is guarding. And yet again, look at the feet, you know, like if you look at her from the top up, that's a martial pose. She's standing guard. But you look at it from the bottom, it's a kid, you know, and it's a kid just in this lovely sort of natural barefooted pose. And look at the disarray that he does with the wheels of the baby carriage. This is again going back to that idea of playing with the rules of perspective and denying the rules of perspective, you know, just like Matisse or Picasso would have done, or, you know, take your choice, you know, but he's saying, you'll get what I mean when I put these wheels, you know, your mind puts it together. I also love the palette of this. I just think, you know, and today I wish I had seen those Coptic pictures before, because if you look at the palette, it's not dissimilar to what we see in some of his paintings. It's not exactly right, but you can see that sort of odd juxtaposition of yellow with green or yellow with red there. And then if you go back to our little friend there with the fly swatter, you know, again, it's an odd juxtaposition of colors. And so I love that you brought that up. I think that that's such a great connection. And as Dimitri points out, that Ethiopian themes would have been active at that time because of the rise of Haile Selassie. And so I think that those are, you know, it's a nice way to kind of tie that in together. I'm really glad that you brought those in.
Thank you, Charlie, for that. And our last piece is this one. And we're thinking about doing a part 2 at some point in the future, because there's just so many paintings out there of William H. Johnson, and we love them, pretty much all of them. So we're thinking about doing a part 2 of this talk, but I want to close with this beautiful picture, with this beautiful painting. Aswani, you want to close with us?
Okay, and I'll try to do so quickly. Again, this is probably from the same period where he's painting family members. One thing that was, and I love the fabric. I love the exploration of planes, you know, your perspective that the table seems to go into the wall, and you see the top of the table as well. Did someone say Cezanne or something? Again, the pairs, 2 pairs of flowers, a beautiful dress that she has on. You see the blue and the green wall in the back that's separated. Uh, that let's see, there's this 2 sides, and he does that. What I was pointed out is that what he does that with is also with the woman that's seated in the chair. And if you were to look at one side of her in that chair, it would appear that she's sitting, and if you look at the other side of her, it appears that she's standing. If you could see, if you would to look at that. But I love the colors that he uses. I love the checkerboard. Again, let's see, who is this? Someone is saying something. I don't know if that is his mother. I think there was another one that I did see that was his mom. And so I'm not sure if this is the same one. I don't believe this is the same picture. But he does have one that he doesn't say it's his mom, but it is. But in any way, I love the colors that he uses, very vibrant. The checkerboard really stands out for me a lot. Anyone else have a comment or?
I just love that you mentioned Cezanne and how he would, turn his table slightly. And then of course, Matisse would take that even further and just, basically make the tabletop vertical, right? So already he's making us think of these European painters. And then what does he put on that table? They're not just flowers, they're sunflowers, right? So if you didn't get the joke with the table, then you better get the joke with the sunflowers and make you think of Van Gogh. So it's really fascinating how he's really, he's clearly left the European school, but he's still tipping his hat to the European school. And I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I appreciate our docents so much, and for you for staying with us this whole time. And we'll bring you another series in a couple of weeks, and we'll post that information in about a week. And thank you so much to our donors and our supporters. And I would like to thank the Smithsonian as well for providing us free access to these images. And I will see you in a couple of weeks. Bye. Oh, docents, I'll see you in the other meeting. Bye.